about fires and try to hire more school psychologists, so any of you feel the need to go to graduate school after you finish, school psychology is a wide open field.
And Sean was here last week and we tried to get them all to think about doing pre-K. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just grateful that you're thinking about education because we're experiencing a real shortage of educators and good educators at this point. COVID has really wiped us out, and there's such a need for teachers that it's more competitive than it's ever been in trying to get to hire folks. So I'm just grateful that you're thinking about it. And I would put one more bug in your ear if you were interested, is to get duly certified in regular ed and special ed. One, it will help you in either class, but two, you can just open doors for you much wider. But I've been doing this a long time. I could be retired. I could go tomorrow. But I do enjoy what I do, and until I don't, I'm good to stay right here. Right now, we're all, the system is working toward getting all of our schools using a multi-tiered system of support framework in all of our buildings, which we've been doing for a while.
Lisa, we haven't touched on that.
Okay.
They right now, unless they've done it in the reading, they don't know what that is.
Well, can we start with their questions first and then go through?
Okay.
That's just where we have to start in terms of making a referral to
Right.
to the
That's
IT team.
That's
So
where, I don't know if we've done a reading about that yet or not. We've talked about a few things. We talked about we've looked at non-discriminatory evaluation, zero reject and all of that. And some folks have posed questions about what the process is for getting a child services.
okay. Well, if it's new, don't hesitate to stop and ask questions. How about that? Because it all starts from this framework. The framework itself is a school improvement framework, and it's looking at resources and equity of resources for all of our students, not just and so that we make sure that whatever resources one school has, we have them across the whole system, and that's where that comes into play. You'll hear about different levels of instruction. We call them tiers of instruction. The first tier is just regular standard core instruction. That's good sound teaching techniques, differentiating, and that you can split that up into 3 different levels as well. You're going to have when you have a classroom, you're going to have a whole group instruction for however many minutes they make it by the time you get there. And then once you do that group instruction, then you're going to separate your kids into homogeneous groups who are having difficulty with those current grade level standards. So those small groups would be based on whoever's having what problems. And you may have some larger groups where they're not very far behind on that core, or you may have some really small groups who need some extra help with that core instruction. But all of that would take place during that right now it's a 90-minute block to teach ELA and reading. But you're looking to, and in those groups you may have to differentiate down, learn to use some different words, change the types of your assignments. Have they been in classes yet? Any classrooms in the schools yet?
No, not
Okay.
not my students, not my students, but
Okay.
Ms. Gaster's students.
So you see some of that. Every Wednesday I spend an hour, 2 hours with a first grade class, and you can see that differentiation as they do their centers. They have different reading level books, they have different written assignments, all of those things. And so we first are concentrating on that grade level core curriculum that they're supposed to be exposed to. And we monitor that progress, and if we find students that are having even more difficulty with those standards, then we expect that the teacher will go and use below grade level standards. typically yes, dear.
Sorry. With COVID happening, I've noticed in the classroom that almost all the students are at least 2 grade levels behind. Would you use the standards that are 2 grade levels behind in their differentiation, or would you still use the same standards, just bring them down?
Good question, good question. They are using, current grade level standards first, yes. And yes, gap data is showing that the kids are a year and a half to 2 years behind, depending on that. They're in the middle of taking their middle of the year, readings for reading and math at the moment. But yes, they would start with those grade level standards, and then as they need to, they would differentiate down to those below grade level standards. Lots of the, even when we were virtual, lots of attendance difficulties and a lot of absences. So, we couldn't retain everybody, and that was a dilemma because we didn't have room to retain all of the people that really needed to be retained last year. So, but the state didn't say you can have a do-over either. So you've got kids that, you've got a wide variety of levels in those classrooms. In this first grade classroom, I see kids who can actually read chapter books, but I've also got kids who can't read 2-letter words. So, it's a wide variety, and these are first graders, so, I mean, they missed their kindergarten year completely, basically. I mean, they weren't, virtual instruction was not meant for everybody, as you well know, or you wouldn't be sitting in this class, you'd be on the computer. So it is difficult, but that's an excellent question, because they do have to drop down below that, but they have to present the grade level curriculum, first, and then they will, based on their assessments and what they're seeing, then they will drop it down. And they'll do some sort of progress monitoring of looking at whatever skill they're most concerned with. Of course, you know, it's mostly reading. They concentrate on reading, and the most common referral concern is reading comprehension, which is a nice way of saying that, but you can't just say reading comprehension because reading has so many components. It's a developmental level skill, so you have to have certain skills to build on, to add the next level skills, and so on. So it's up to the teacher to figure out where that is. Is it letter identification? Is it sound awareness? Is it sight words? It depends on where they are, and that's where they would start intervening. We can't just intervene on reading comprehension, because all of that's involved in reading comprehension. And that's typically what we will do, once they determine that they're not really, making the grade level standards as they should. They'll drop back into whatever area, and that's it. You can see that in the, centers that they're doing, that they have leveled or differentiated types of activities for them. It's a lot of work, actually, for a teacher, to get that and be aware of all of the students in her room, and most of it depends on where you are. Most of them have at least 15 to 20 kids, if not more, depending on how many are out for COVID at one point or another. I'll be so glad when the little ones can all get their vaccines, and hopefully they will. Also coming up is the science of reading. You saw that, may have seen that was part of legislation that was just passed in the last session here in the state, and so teachers are going to be getting some instruction on that science of reading, which will also require them to put in place a reading plan for all of those students who are showing delays in reading. That training is taking place through the spring and summer, so we'll see where that lands in the fall.
So that's the individual plan for every student?
Pretty much is my understanding.
Is it kind of like an IEP, but not?
But not.
Wow.
But it will provide good information, and it actually dovetails with all that they would be doing anyway, as part of the, in multi-tiered systems of support, in their classrooms. But that would also, we would also do, everything that I talk about for academics, we would also do for behavior concerns, okay?
Correct.
Yes, what's the difference right now between, because in what they're trying to do now?
The science of reading is actually a systematic approach to looking at reading skills, and so it'd be more like doing a reading inventory and looking to see where, doing like a universal screening for reading and looking at those skills that they have deficits in. They're not giving up AR, trust me. I mean, that's still up there.
But
I'm sorry, I have a very low opinion of AR because it's not used the way it should be.
No,
It's a competition and.
And mostly what AR does is test the student's level of vocabulary. So, you know, if a student can't read, then the student is missing some of the phonological skills or phonemic awareness skills, then they're not gonna be able to get that vocabulary. The science of reading is that systematic approach of teaching each one of those with integrity and until the student masters it before going on to the next activity. Deontay has a question over here.
What exactly is AR?
Accelerated Reader is the name of the program, and basically what the teacher does is they have the children, reading in wherever they're capable of reading, and for every book, there's a certain number of points assigned to the book, and so they, based on their reading level, are assigned the point level that they are, a point level goal that they should read, every quarter. It was designed to make children want to read, and get kids interested in reading. Now it's just a competition to make sure you can get all of your points by the end of the quarter. And for some kids, that's okay, because they like to read. Those kids that are struggling in reading, then it becomes more difficult for them, and it becomes a battle to get them to do those things, so.
And I'll interrupt for 1 second. And that's what I talk about in my grammar class and when I do teach reading in my reading classes. We can't make students do something if they're not interested in it and if they don't like it, right? And so we're doing everything, I'm not gonna say it, that's not a nice word, but backwards, right? And yesterday, I was in a special education class observing one of my student teachers, and the teacher said to the student, not my student teacher, but one of the teachers in there, I know, Johnny, that you wanna read about LeBron James, but you're gonna have to choose one of these books to read. And then my ears were this big and I was horrified because if a student wants to read about LeBron James,
That's right.
and that's what's gonna get that student to read, then that's what we need to be having the student read. So I'm listening, I'm trying to listen to my student teacher over here, but I'm listening over here because I want to see what's going on. The book picked out, I hear the student reading, I see flowers. I see the sky. And that has just been heavy on my heart since I left that room because I thought the student wanted to read about LeBron James. We could find something, and the person working with him knew that. But that just kind of was a spin off of what you were saying
You're
there.
right.
Okay.
You're right. I mean, they spent a year and a half playing on the computer and not having too many books in their possession unless they had books at home. So, if they have an interest, we need to foster that interest. I will say that they are using more graphic novels now with kids so that they're able to, they have the same story content that the regular books do, but it has all of the pictures to help those kids who are more visual learners, and the amount of vocabulary is not quite as large as it is in just the regular type books. And some schools also have low interest, high interest, low vocabulary words where you still got the LeBron James, but you don't have the same vocabulary that you might have at that grade level. So, but yes, and I'm so sorry that that opportunity was missed.
Yeah, I just have to say, and some of you have heard this from me before, I taught first grade for 22 years. The first 6 or 7 I taught reading groups, read out of what my book told me to say, et cetera, et cetera. I think I had 6 or 8 children most of the time that couldn't pass first grade. I went to a different approach, and I very seldom ever at that time had anybody that didn't pass. And one year I had a child that came to me reading Harry Potter
Yeah.
in first grade, and if I had made him go back and read, you know,
Oh, Lord.
I would have lost him completely.
Yes,
I would have, and so you really got to find ways
that's right.
to do that, and I did it through a home reading program where everybody took home a book every night and read what they wanted to read.
That's good, that's good.
You let them choose the book they wanted to read?
To some, I let him do that, but I had leveled books that where whatever level they were on, there was a box of books that were marked, and I kept, every night they took home a book and they read to their mom and they brought it back and read a paragraph out of it. They never knew what I was gonna choose, and they read a piece of it to me, so I could tell if they had read it or not, or they read to one of my parents. And we had, when they finished a box of maybe 15 or 20 books, they got a reward,
Yes.
and they were very excited about reading.
Yes, I love first, second grade. Third grade, they start getting anxiety because they're, all they hear about is tests and tests
Yes.
and end of the grade tests and that kind of thing. It's funny, I scatter, I just kind of wander the room when I'm in the first grade class, and we were just about finished, and one of the little girls called me over and she was showing me her timer because she had read just a, like, 10-line story, and it was like 1 minute and something, and I said, I don't think so, and I made her read it again, and of course, it was not 1 minute and such, but she was only, it was looking at fluency, and she only missed one word, but, yeah. Yeah, so they're given a lot of autonomy too during those centers, although the teacher does go around and check their work. But yeah, so when we do that, and once we find out that those students are not achieving at grade level, and most of them aren't, then we're gonna drop back to whatever skill level we need to. And if you think about math and reading, all of those are developmentally based, so as you're learning skills and adding on skills, at some point, they don't learn a skill completely, and instead of getting retaught or going back and reteaching that skill to make sure that everybody has that skill, that one particular student may just start digging a hole for themselves, because they can't go forward until they've mastered this one particular skill so they can add on the others. So we have to go back to that point where that skill is, and that's where we're gonna start our intervention and doing more for that below grade level standard, as I said. And we're gonna monitor that progress. Teacher's gonna put together what we call a personal education plan to list that particular goal or standard that needs to be worked on, so that the parent will know what they're working on and what they're doing to work on that goal and how they're measuring progress for that goal. We're not necessarily looking for grade level performance at that point. We're looking for good growth, which is kind of what we should be doing now. Lots of mixed messages around education these days, because we know everybody is behind. Somehow we have to become comfortable with that, every kid being behind, so that we can just concentrate on growth, which is the model that the world started with when I started in education, which is a much better model than the one we have now. So they will continue with that intervention. Most of those are small groups, but using below grade level standards and expectations. If that progress is not enough, they will intensify that intervention, meaning they can increase the number of times that they see that student. They can increase the duration of time that they work with that student, but the intensity is there for on a weekly basis, and they are progress monitored on a weekly basis, so that we have more data points to look at to see where they're going in regard to their progress. And so this is the way it's supposed to be. Okay, when you go in the building, you may see this right, you may see variations of this, because teachers are still feeling like they have to get kids to grade level, which is an awesome task when you've got, all kids at least a year to a year and a half below where they should be based, and that's just because they weren't there. And we had a huge number of kids who missed a lot of instruction. They didn't always log on. And we were very generous last year as to how we, monitored attendance. So even if you didn't show up for class, if you went in and you got your assignments from class, you were given credit for it. You didn't have to turn them in, you just had to go in and get your assignments. So, lots of catching up to do. But after we intensify that, intervention and the progress is still not where we want it, then that's when we begin to think the next level, which would be specialized instruction or exceptional children's services. And at that point, the student service team in every school has one, would begin to examine data from all sorts of sources, from screening data, vision and hearing screening, to the progress monitoring data that's available, to just in social and health information about this child from the time they were born to the present time. And they will continue monitoring that intensive intervention for a while, depending to see if they are continue to making any progress or what kind of progress they're making. But they may at some point decide they need to refer to the IEP team to consider eligibility for those services. The way multi-tiered systems of support is supposed to work and set up is that you work with students and they can cross between those tiers. The goal of using these tiers is not to end up in a special education
Right,
referral.
that's what I was just getting ready to say. The goal is to keep them out, especially,
That's
did you
right.
see how that's working as you talked about each level? Because we started with the general standards. We started with the exposure that all students are supposed to have. And then we worked down from that. So the goal is we're doing everything we can to see if these students can learn, right? Before we have to
Yes.
put them in special education.
And I'm not against special education, I love special education teachers, they're wonderful. But, many times after we've identified a student as being eligible for specialized instruction, somehow we lower our expectations for that child, and we don't push them as hard as we would as the regular ed teacher. Now, they're still making progress, but many of them could be making even more progress, because we do want to teach kids, especially those who are just have a learning disability in one particular area. We want to teach them those coping skills and compensation skills so that they do go back in that regular setting. It is not meant to, special ed was never meant to be a place where you got put and left for the rest of your academic career. And we do that, unfortunately, with a lot of our kids who have behavior problems. When they end up in that separate setting, then they're there most of the time for life, because nobody, I mean, I won't get on that soapbox, but we don't do as good a job as we should pushing these children out of specialized instruction. We don't necessarily have to dismiss them or exit them out of the program, but they don't have to have the same level of service, just as we're trying to do in that regular setting when we give those interventions at different levels of intensity. That's what we should be doing when we have our students in the special education class. We should be giving them the minimum amount of services to see what they need there to help them learn and bridge that gap, especially for those kids who have dyslexia, and there's so many different types of dyslexia. But, so we're trying to hit that area that is causing them to continue to dig their hole. And then we want to move them out and reduce that service. Parents, are any of you parents now, before I start mouthing off? Many parents these days don't want their children to have to fail. They don't want them to have to work hard. And so they want them to have whatever they need to not have to do that. I can tell you, when I first started in the field, special education was a bad word. Nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted you to talk about their children needing it. It was horrible. And now they come asking for it. So, and a lot of that is just, they don't have the, most of them don't have that. A significant learning disability. then they would have, if they worked with it at home a little more in conjunction with everything that's going on in school, then we could see a lot of growth with that. And we are seeing growth for those kids that are attending regularly this year, face-to-face. Those kids are making growth, but you can't make up more than a year within a year in most cases. So it's gonna take several years for us to recover from whenever this finishes, whatever this is.
So, and I'm echoing what she's saying, so what she's talking about here too is not only you're teaching the students, but building those relationships
Yes.
that we were talking about, building the relationships with the parents.
Yes.
So she just said you get so much more done, excuse me, so much more done when the parents participate and cooperate and help with the child at home as well.
Yeah, don't just call when they're bad, please. Please call when they've done something good as well, like when you get in the classroom. Parents get so tired of hearing the bad stuff that they quit picking up the phone, and they will not answer you. So you wanna get to know your students, you wanna get to know your parents, and build that alliance. That's not as strong as it was when I was growing up, and I think that is part of our downfall as well. We don't have those relationships, our teachers don't have those relationships, and rightly so. Some of them have been, some parents are not always nice when they confront teachers. But I think if you start at the beginning, you'll be able to build that relationship. So once the IEP team, or once the student service team decides to refer that student to the IEP team, they gather up all of that data that's been collected and fill out the couple of forms that need to be sent over to the IEP team. And then it's the responsibility of the IEP team to meet with the parent and discuss their concerns, discuss the teacher's concerns, talk about whatever information they have, and then discuss what areas they may need to look at. There's this wonderful little book that the state puts out, which is called the Procedures Manual for Special Education. It lists all of the 14 different disabling conditions, along with the required screenings and evaluations for those different disabling conditions, along with a whole lot of other stuff that has to do with the law. But the IEP team then is charged with looking at all of the areas that they might need to consider, because that drives the types of evaluations that need to be completed. So they do that, and they make that decision, and they finish that paperwork, and they pass that off to the different evaluators to complete those evaluations, and then they, of course, come back and look at the results of those, and then they compare that with what's in that lovely procedures manual and decide what's the most appropriate way to go for that particular student. In general, whatever they give for special education, they try to start with the least restrictive environment, meaning they're going to start at the lowest level of special education that they think the child can begin to learn, so that they can monitor that progress. The EC teachers are also supposed to collect data based on what the students are doing in their classrooms, and that way it guides them as to whether they need more time with specialized instruction as opposed to where they are. If they happen to be in the most intensive level of specialized instruction, then they want to start moving those children out back in, spending more time into that regular classroom as soon as possible, so that they can begin to cope with their same age peers and grade peers. So that's the way it's supposed to work. I'm not going to say that it works that way everywhere all the time. This has been a really different year, a big growing year. So, because it's hard for teachers want kids to learn so badly that they want everybody to be on grade level. Now, in a normal year, you're not going to have everybody on grade level. You're going to have some kids that are just at the bottom level of that grade level. You're going to have some that are, 1 to 2 grade levels below. Or you're going to have kids that are, ready to go just below the next grade level. So you've got to learn to help all of those students, progress, so that, they're not just staying at that particular level. And it's hard. I mean, being a teacher is hard now because you have politics involved and different, and you don't, your classroom's yours, but it's not really yours because they want to tell you what you need to do. All of you think you're gonna go special education or just regular or have you made that leap yet?
Like most everyone in here is elementary education.
Good.
Deontay
Special education.
is special education.
Good job. I'm just happy that you're interested in education. We need good teachers. We don't have enough. They did get a raise, thankfully, when the budget was finally passed. Yes.
I haven't heard this term a lot since I've been in North Carolina,
Okay.
but in Florida, a popular term was an inclusive classroom.
Right.
Every teacher that I've asked about that has kind of looked at me a little strange. Is that not something that North Carolina does? They don't do
No,
inclusive?
they are inclusive classrooms. They are supposed to be inclusive classrooms.
Okay.
Dusty, the, poster right around the corner was my capstone, and that's what I did, inclusive classrooms.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll take that.
I will, supposed to be inclusive classrooms. We want we want our students to be with their peers, obviously, for as much as they can. And that special education should not prevent them from doing that. We should be able to serve and get them time in both of those environments. Now, some of your children who are 2 or more grade levels behind, who are more on the intellectually disabled level, they may do more with resources as opposed to the academic teaching itself. So they may do more with the art and the physical education, recess, those kinds of things, so that they are involved with their same peers. But
So they would be in the special education classroom, and then when it was time for resource, they would typically come to the classroom to do resource time?
yeah, they would either go to, depending on their age, they would either go to that classroom, or maybe one of the assistants would take the students to the classroom. A lot of that depends, and that's part of the IEP process when they sit down to meet and look at the goals that they want to put on that IEP. They have to discuss all of that time in the regular classroom, all of that time in the special education classroom. But, are they as inclusive as they should be? Probably not. But they are supposed to be inclusive.
Does it vary by schools, Lisa?
It does, unfortunately.
Because I know at one time we had some schools, for example, in Cumberland County, where the therapists, like the speech therapist and occupational therapist and physical therapist, actually came into the regular classroom to work with the students. And many schools discontinued that because what happened when the therapist would come in to work with this student, she was also working with this student and this student. And so the therapist felt like they were doing more work than they should. But I think if we had stopped to think about it a little bit, we were actually building more skills in an environment that way, because we were teaching this student how to work with this student and this student.
And we do more of that at the secondary level than we do with the elementary level. We don't do as much pull-out for our secondary students, our middle and high school students. The teacher pushes into those classrooms. You don't see that as much in the elementary classrooms, although you will see it, but it depends on the school itself. And she's right, it does help them because they're able to work with all of the students, not just the 1 or 2 that are identified as needing specialized instruction. But you're right, it should be more at the elementary level than wait until the secondary level to get there, because they need that foundation. The problem with all of those other related services is we don't have enough of those people either, and that's part of the reason they don't push in anymore.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
it's a fortunate because we have the occupational therapy program here at Methodist. I mean, so that you all are at least putting out folks that are going into the field. But right now, it's a buyer's market, basically, for SLPs, OTs, and PTs.
And then another way that I have seen inclusion at the elementary level is Long Hill Elementary School, for example, has one teacher per grade level who takes all of the children that are like right on the borderline of maybe they might, when they get 8 years old, they might be needing a special, and they're testing for a specialized classroom. And that teacher will have half of the students who are the more typical students right on grade level, and then the other half of the students will be those needing more intensive care or education. So I've seen it done that way, where there's a mixture of half and half. But I'm still seeing way too many, like the classroom that I was in yesterday at the high school level, 17 students.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, and then the next thing I asked was, do these students stay together all day long in this classroom? Yes. And what else about these students? These students go to lunch at 10:45 before the rest of the students come to the lunchroom. And they eat by themselves with their teachers. And as I watched, I'm looking.
There's not a lot of people eating, I mean, a lot of these kids are eating lunch in their classrooms,
Yeah, right.
unfortunately.
Right.
now.
But what I'm just saying, as a parent of a child with special
Oh,
needs,
yeah.
as I told the class, I'm sitting on the fence, all right, because I have a child with special needs, and then I teach teachers who are going to teach those with
Yep.
special needs.
Yep,
So I'm evaluating everything up and down and all around everywhere I go.
yep.
And, but as I look at those students, I'm thinking, how come these students are eating with the rest of the folks? So then I went on to say, well, do they get to go for music or physical education? Or, no, this group of students, and it's an ID moderate classroom. And these students, most of them were verbal, and they were interacting with each other in the classroom. And I just wondered, why can't we try this? So, Cumberland County Schools still has site-based management, correct?
Yes.
So that means that within,
That was gonna be my point.
is that your point? Yeah.
That's-
So that means that we have some rules that can be followed, but the power is in the principal to determine how he or she is going to interpret that rule that needs to be followed. And that's why, as I travel, because I do most of the evaluations for our department. So when you're out in the schools, I'll be out there supervising you. So I get around, right? And I'm asking questions about it because I want to find out. And it can be so different down the street here, and you go down over the river and you see a whole different thing. And so it's really not a level playing field all the time.
And with the concentration on multi-tiered systems of support, that equity is a big piece of that. And then looking at what is happening in each of those schools and how that is equitable for the
I see.
minorities as opposed, and that would include the special ed kids.
Right.
The special ed kids are supposed to be receiving that same core instruction, grade level instruction.
Right.
They may.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying the multi-tiered system of support provides a more level playing field throughout the county for these
That is
folks.
the intent.
That is the intent.
We're getting there.
Okay.
They're still getting instruction in that. That COVID interrupted our
Yes, it did.
progression in that, so that's part of the problem.
Is that only for Cumberland County though?
No, actually, that's a state mandate across the state. You should see that, and you will see it, and depending on what county you see, because we were all brought in different cohorts, and Cumberland County was actually in the last cohort. So if you went into Wake County or Charlotte-Mecklenburg, they were in the first cohorts, and you would see a totally different version of MTSS. So, and you can go on their websites and actually just compare what we have in terms of website material for MTSS. Because Wake County has their process on their website, Charlotte Meck has their website set up the same way. Charlotte Mecklenburg. Yeah, they used to be two separate systems and they merged, but they kept two different names. We just took the county name when we merged way back in the 80s. Before some of you were even born. But, yes. So we're looking for fidelity in instruction, we're looking for fidelity in the interventions that are being used with students so that, they are the same, and so that we can actually make those comparisons and make them with some degree of accuracy. Does every teacher teach the same way? Is every lesson gonna work the same for every classroom? It doesn't, and that's what your PLCs are for, performance learning communities. You can come and that's where teachers talk about those lessons and talk about, you know, what worked in one room and what flopped in another, and can we use what Miss So-and-so did in her room in this other room, those kinds of things. But that's what we're looking for, fidelity and instruction. But you still have to be creative, even though, you know, you've got a whole set of rules that you have to worry about. I've been pleasantly pleased being in that first grade classroom for the last month or so. You know, the teacher is doing some good work and she's got lots of differentiation going on. I have not seen whole group instruction, but, what I have seen, I've been impressed with. But, you know, it's tough to be a teacher of any kind, especially right now. And as long as there's, you know, politics has a hand in it, it's never gonna be exactly what you want. I mean, you try to teach children to read using the same reading approach for everybody, and, you know, you all don't learn the same way. Kids don't learn that way either. I mean, I learned with Sally, Dick, and Jane, which was sight word based, and it was, you know, go dog, go. And it just built from there. And some kids need that. There's nothing more frustrating to sit and listen to kids try to sound out words, but, when they don't really hear those sounds very well, and they just sound like they're choking or stuttering. I like the approach of closing your door and then teaching it whatever this child needs to teach, but I'll deny it if you say I said it.
The cooperating teacher this semester mentioned that he feels, and this is a personal, like a opinion question.
Okay.
He feels like all the students who have gone through COVID are gonna continue to struggle until they finish high school or quit. Do you think this multi-tiered system of support is gonna help those students so they don't struggle for their whole education?
You know, if we have enough teachers, if we have certified teachers that are trained teachers. Right now, you know, we've got so many holes and pockets where teachers are out quarantined, and, so in some places we're doing babysitting as opposed to educating. I do think it's gonna take at least 5 years for us to come out of COVID and to see, any change in a lot of these kids. You know, what you can see is where these kids were helped with their parents, they've done well. And I think a lot of parents finally realized what teachers were trying to tell them about their students, these older elementary students, where they've been trying to get the parents to understand that Johnny was having a problem. But, I don't know how long. I do think it's gonna be at least 5 years. I don't know what the normal is gonna be, but, you know, I met with a principal of one of the early colleges last week, and she was saying that everybody but the receptionist was taking care of a class. That means the bookkeeper was in a class, the AP was in a class, the principal was in a class, because there's nobody to put in the classes. And most of those kids are taking college classes on top of that, so, that's what we're facing right now. And so until we can have a a full complement of teachers in those buildings, then we're not gonna see the kind of progress that we wanna see, because not all of them are qualified to teach. They're just doing the best they can.
One of my friends up in, what's up here, this Harnett County, up at Overhill, said that her daughter's teacher was one of the lunchroom cooks.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they had nobody
have
else,
to put a
nobody
body
else
in
to
there.
cover.
Well, and I don't know, back in the spring when we went back for just that few weeks, a couple of months, they would quarantine those whole grades, and so they would take those kids out of school and let them learn virtually. Now we're keeping kids in the buildings for the sake of keeping kids in the building. And, I mean, I think that's good because it continues a routine, but, we don't have qualified subs, we don't have, we got bodies, and that's what it is, so it's gonna take a long time.
Correct me if I'm wrong, to be a substitute, you don't even need an associate's degree.
You
just have
don't,
to be
but they
enrolled.
do require them to take a couple of courses through Fayetteville Tech, to, understand classroom environments, behavior management, and that kind of thing. Because we do have long-term subs, in regular classrooms, we've got long-term subs in special education classrooms. I mean, and you can go lateral entry with just about any, degree and end up in a special education classroom. You can have a degree in psychology and go lateral entry into, special ed classroom. So, I'm not saying anything against lateral entry people, because I see some of the best teachers that have started as lateral entry people. They're just natural teachers, always have been, and it took them a while to find where they were supposed to be. But, they still have to go through and get their certification, but sometimes those are better than those who started out and just kind of found themselves in teaching.
So that would be like somebody with like a law degree who decided they wanted to be a teacher, so they did those couple
Any
of
4-year
education courses and got
yeah.
their licensure.
Any 4-year degree, actually. So you just need to, you need to get the certification. Pedagogy classes basically is what those are, to make up the difference in your license. But, so yeah, until we've got a consistent buildings full of folks who are trained to be teachers, we won't know how long it's gonna take, I don't think. I hope it doesn't take as long as your teacher is suggesting, because, I hate to see kids drop out. But we have kids that effectively drop out in elementary school. I mean, we've got kids that haven't come back since Christmas. I mean, social workers have been out to see the parents, it's not a big deal.
And being that students don't actually have to be full-time students until they're 7 years old, does that impact their starting of school too?
Very rarely, very rarely. There's a few, and unfortunately, some of those are special education students who probably should have started when they were 3 as opposed to 7. No, most of the parents, when they reach that kindergarten age, they're ready to push them out of the house for 6 hours a day.
That's good,
Yeah.
it sounds good.
And then, when you get to, when you look at them and you've got birthdays in June, July, and August, you got babies, and so they're gonna be really young in kindergarten. And, so sometimes those students are better given another year of preschool, if they're in a preschool, before they go into kindergarten, so that they are actually, because those kids are barely 5 when they start. And in our year-round elementary schools, that's what happens. We've got kids that are starting, and they're still 4 years old. They won't turn 5 until, some of them, until August. So,
My birthday's in September and I hated that when they made me wait another year because I was always older than all my classmates, but it also helped me in my reading.
Yeah.
I knew how to read when I started
Yeah.
kindergarten.
yeah, mine too. I was always the smallest in class. But I know what you mean. I was happy when they finally moved the birthday at least to August 31st. It used to be October 31st. so we did, I would rather it be June myself, make it the middle of the year. But so either it's good to hold those kids back and let them start kindergarten older, or we hold them back at some point. At some point, they will need just a developmental retention, because socially and emotionally, they are just not ready. And generally, first grade is a good time to do that. Unfortunately, sometimes, girls are tricky though. Sometimes you won't see the difficulties with them until they get to middle school. And middle school is just,
Lisa, is the multi-tier system of report used in middle school and high
Yes.
school?
it's supposed to be, yes.
Okay.
As I said, the principals are still learning, and even the student support staff are still learning. But,
So what you're saying is the professionals are still learning about the multiple
right, I mean, we
tiered
had
system.
We had started it
Oh.
under the acronym of RTI, Response to
Right, I know about
Intervention,
RTI,
so, which is kind of it's sort of, that was folded into
Right.
MTSS. MTSS is, they have an MTSS committee, which is, in some schools, is the school improvement team. That MTS committee is meant to be a large committee, so that, there's input from different grade levels, from different sources, so that they can look at the equity of resources in the building and can make, and map those resources in the building so that they know what they have. The other thing that we're hoping that we can get the principals to do, especially the elementary principals, is when they make their master schedule, they include a daily intervention time period, so that during that day, there's always a period where either teachers could move to certain students who had a particular difficulty, or those students could move to them. That builds in that time for the intervention, so that teachers don't have to find extra time to do that below grade level standard intervention.
Okay, is that why, I think I've seen that happening in the schools, they take the homeroom time,
Some of
and
them,
then the teachers, that's where the teachers work on these different interventions that they've come up with. So that, I'm making that connection now.
yeah.
So they did do it during what they call a homeroom.
Some do it
time.
homeroom, some have just a block during the day, but it's built into that master schedule so that the teachers can feel like it's not something they have to find extra time to do, which there's no extra time to do anything in that kind of
I know
day.
that.
So,
Are there any things, and I've seen some schools too, that they start at 8 o'clock,
oh yeah.
then they'll have the students come at 7:30 for their early interventions. That, I'm making that connection now too, I see, so that they build it in that way.
Yep. So,
Wow.
but in that way you have your best teachers intervening in that area where the intervention needs to go, as opposed to it may not be the student's teacher that's doing the intervening, it may be a different teacher, which is not always bad, because everybody's different, and everybody has different strengths, and that's a good thing when you work with kids, because, the big thing is to, hook them when they're little.
So then the teachers doing the intervention would progress monitor and collect that data.
Yep.
And then go back to the team. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's a lot of
I'm
keeping
learning
up with
about,
stuff.
sorry,
It's okay.
I'm learning about interdisciplinary methods this semester. Do you think that having kids broken down by subject is taking away? I don't know how to word it, but like, cause I noticed that in the morning they do ELA, in the afternoon they do
Always.
math. There's no like
Yeah, I hate it.
bringing it together. So
Yeah.
do you think that would help?
Yes, I do. I believe that you can teach reading in any subject, and we should be teaching reading in any subject. We can teach reading in math, we can teach reading in science, we don't need a 90-minute block to teach reading. You gotta read to do everything, and it doesn't make any sense to isolate it in one 90-minute period. I agree with you. Of course, I also agree that same-sex classes in certain age levels is a better thing to do as well, but that's not gonna happen while I'm still working, I'm sure. Just because, the theory is that girls are intimidated by boys when it comes to STEM activities, science, technology, math, and those kinds of things. So to get them a good foundation, some schools in the state will actually have all the boys in one class and all the girls in one class, so that they feel, they get their sea legs, so to speak, before they put them back together to learn those skills. But, I'm an advocate of that as well. But I'm an advocate of whatever works, we need to be doing it as well. And we don't see that as often, because everything is so regimented like that in the schedule now. We got really good teachers, but when we tie one hand behind their back, it makes it difficult, so. Anybody else?
Any questions, folks, about IEPs, IEP meetings? What is required now for, and my daughter's 21, she's kind of out of the system there, but you have to have a general education teacher, a
Yeah.
special education teacher, someone who can interpret the results. That's 3.
You have to have a parent, you have to have a parent, you have to have whatever, disciplinary, evaluator who did the evaluations, are typically there. The way, somebody who knows the student well is the way they list that, and somebody who is knowledgeable about the curriculum. So, and then of course, the special educator is the one who would prepare the draft IEP, based on those evaluation
So we're talking about a minimum of
minimum of 4 to 5.
4 or 5 people for an IEP.
You said the parent, the evaluator, the interpreter of the results, the special educator, who else?
Someone who understands the current curriculum, the general curriculum, for that age grade level. So that they can make sure that those goals are correlating with that standard course of study.
And that person would have to know about, child development as well as the standards, right?
We would hope,
Yes.
we would hope. And, you know, we would hope, you know, let's face it, I mean, you said you taught reading in school, in the reading courses here at the university. I've spoken to many a teacher who went back to get their master's in reading and then realized that they really never knew how to teach reading until they got their master's in reading. So, just bear that in mind when you start teaching. But we have different, you know, there are different, programs that they have for the, special education classrooms that dovetail with the current reading series. But, the system is actually going to be purchasing a new reading curriculum this year, so.
The one they were using was Written Wisdom, right?
In the majority of classes, it's still not in every class, but that one's going bye-bye. But that's the part that bothers me. I mean, some kids benefited from written wisdom. So I think that we ought to be able to use whatever curriculum works for whatever group of kids. Which is kind of what we did a long, long time ago.
Folks, any other questions for Ms. Craver? Okay. For the folks in my class, then, I'm going to, I'll put up a link to you to do your, reflection. And then I'll also put up announcements, so make sure you read the announcements for what we're doing next week. I know what we're doing, but I'll put it up on the announcements for Tuesday and Thursday for next week. Thank you so much for taking the time to come here today.